Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky using his moment on the global stage at the UN General Assembly today to issue a warning and a plea to the world. Zelensky stressing the need for more military aid to keep fighting Russia, while also warning that the weapons of war are evolving quickly and in ways that endanger all nations. He also called out the UN for not providing effective solutions and being too weak to end wars.
Nations can speak about their pain from stages like this. But even during bloodshed, there isn't a single international institution that can truly stop it. That's how weak these institutions have become. What can Sudan or Somalia or Palestine or any other people living through war really expect from the UN or the global system? For decades, just statements and statements.
Zelensky's address today follows some unexpected new support from President Trump, certainly some new rhetoric. With us now is former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Stephen Pifer. He's now with the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford. Ambassador, Zelensky called this post from Trump where he says Ukraine can win a big shift. I mean, is it a big shift, or is Zelensky being overly hopeful?
Well, certainly it's a shift in Mr. Trump's rhetoric, and I think what it reflects is growing frustration on the president's part that he's now, I think, given Putin and Russia maybe 5 deadlines to change course, and each time Putin has ignored him. Now, the question, though, is that if he's made this rhetorical shift, will he follow it up with some real action, like beginning to impose tighter sanctions on Russia? Or beyond just being prepared to sell weapons to Ukraine, actually asking Congress for money to fund weapons for Ukraine?
At the UNGA, we were talking with our Jim Sciutto, who is talking to European leaders there, and they're really receiving Trump's statement as he's putting the onus on Europe, the EU and NATO, to fund and support Ukraine. Now, we should note that Trump says we, the U.S., will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. We also spoke with Republican Congressman Carlos Jimenez, and he told Boris last hour that the U.S. is the senior member in NATO. So that shouldn't be seen as shifting the onus to Europe. The U.S. is very much involved and is going to continue to be. How do you see it?
Well, Brianna, I think there has been a shift. I mean, bear in mind, in the previous administration, Congress provided $80 billion to provide weapons for Ukraine to defend itself. And I think that was a recognition by Congress that, containing Russia actually is in the American interest here. What we have from President Trump is a readiness to sell weapons to NATO that they can then give to Ukraine. But there's been no approach to Congress asking for additional assistance. So I think that has been a change. And it did seem from some of the things that the president said yesterday that he really does want to move this burden to Europe and to Ukraine and sort of maybe minimize American participation. I think that would be a mistake, and it would be seen, given his engagement over the last 7 months, as really a failure of his diplomacy to make any progress in ending this horrible war.
Trump also said yesterday that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft that violate NATO airspace. That would include jets. We saw jets in Estonia's airspace. Do you think that's a real possibility?
Well, I think NATO has to come up with a better approach to dealing with these Russian incursions. So 2 weeks ago, the Russians launched 19 drones that violated Polish airspace. 1 or 2 might have been an accident. It's hard to believe that 19 were an accident. There was a message there. And then you had 3 Russian MiG-31 fighters flying through Estonian airspace, despite efforts by the Estonians and NATO aircraft to wave them away. So there has to be, I think, some action to get the Russians to respect NATO airspace. And now they simply seem not to care about the NATO response.
How do you think Russia is viewing kind of this series of more bellicose or strong rhetoric from Trump?
Well, I think the Russians have already poo-pooed the idea. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, was very negative on it today. But it does perhaps introduce into the Kremlin, they may have to think about, what if Trump's shift is not just rhetorical, But does he reach a point where he begins to do some real things, like imposing additional sanctions, like providing funds that would allow the Ukrainians to continue to arm themselves and continue the war, that might begin to have a real impact? Part of this now is you have with Vladimir Putin somebody who thinks he can still achieve his goals on the battlefield. And what the United States should be working with Europe and Ukraine to do is to persuade him that that's not going to be possible, and that if he continues to try, the costs to Russians are only going to go higher and higher. And that's the question. Will Trump follow his rhetoric shift with now some real actions that would make this war more costly for the Russians?
Yeah. Does he put his money where his mouth is? We will see. Ambassador Stephen Pifer, thank you so much for being with us.